I was 55 years old when I paid for my neighbor's groceries, a sweet older lady who lived down the block from me. As we said our goodbyes, she leaned in close and whispered in my ear, "When your husband heads off to work, don't you dare look at the plants in your front yard." It made absolutely no sense, so I just brushed it off and ignored it. But the very next day, as soon as I took a glance at my front yard, my entire world came crashing down. But before I spill the tea on the rest of this story, leave a comment down below telling us what state or city you are watching from. We love knowing where our subscribers are tuning in from. My name is Linda, and my whole life, I have prided myself on being a practical, down-to-earth woman. I was never one of those people who believed in superstitions or old wives' tales. I always trusted what I could see, touch, and prove. But everything changed that Thursday afternoon when I decided to do a random act of kindness that would end up uncovering the most painful truth of my existence. I was at the local grocery store in our suburb, pushing my cart down the brightly lit aisles when I saw her, Betty. She lived 3 houses down from mine in a small, weathered house with peeling paint and a rusty chain-link fence. I saw her walking down the street every now and then, always hunched over, always completely alone. That day, she was standing in front of the rice and beans aisle, checking prices with a look that was a heartbreaking mix of exhaustion and resignation. I watched her as she picked up the cheapest store-brand bag, only to put it back on the shelf, as if even that was too much for her wallet to handle. Her cart was practically empty. A few boxes of mac and cheese, a half carton of eggs, a small bottle of vegetable oil. That was it. I felt my heart sink into my stomach. I had a comfortable life, a husband who made great money, a spacious house in a nice neighborhood. I never went without. How could I just walk right past her and turn a blind eye? I approached her gently, not wanting to startle her. "Betty?" I called out softly. She turned around. Her tired eyes took a second to recognize me. "Hello, honey?" she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Is everything okay?" I asked, even though the answer was written all over her pale face, her worn-out clothes, and the shaky hands gripping the handle of her shopping cart. "Oh, I am hanging in there," she said, trying to force a smile. I looked at her cart, then at mine, which was overflowing with groceries. I did not even think twice about it. "Let me treat you to your groceries today," I said, lightly touching her arm. "I want to take care of this for you. Please, let me." I saw the surprise take over her face. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. "It is not charity. It is just one neighbor giving a helping hand to another. We all need a break sometimes," I insisted with a genuine smile. Her eyes started to well up with tears, and for a second, I thought she was going to turn me down. But then she gave a small nod, offering a silent gratitude that absolutely broke my heart. We walked together down the aisles, and I encouraged her to grab whatever she needed. At first, she was too embarrassed, but slowly she started putting things into her cart. A whole roast chicken, fresh fruit, a pack of bagels, even some cleaning supplies. It was as if every item represented a tiny victory against the hardship surrounding her. I smiled, so happy to be able to make that difference, no matter how small it was. At the checkout counter, when it was time to pay, I swiped my card without a second thought. The total was nothing to me, but for her, it probably meant weeks of eating decent meals. While the bag boy loaded up the groceries, Betty grabbed my hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong for someone so fragile. "Thank you, sweetheart. God will reward you." We walked out to the parking lot, where I helped her load the bags into the trunk of my car. I offered to give her a ride home, since we lived on the exact same street. During the short drive over, she stayed quiet, staring out the window with a distant look in her eyes. I tried to make small talk, asking about her family, but her answers were short and evasive. When we pulled up in front of her house, I helped her unload the groceries. That was when it happened. She stepped close to me, got up on her tiptoes, her face so close I could feel her warm breath. With a voice so low I almost did not catch it, she whispered right into my ear. "When your husband heads off to work tomorrow, do not look at the plants in the garden." I instinctively pulled back, totally thrown off by how close she got and how bizarre those words were. "Excuse me?" I asked, thinking I must have misheard her. But she was already turning around, grabbing her bags, and mumbling her thanks as she walked up to her front door. "Thank you, honey. Thank you," she repeated, without ever looking back. I stood there for a second, totally confused. Do not look at the garden plants? What kind of advice was that? I shook my head, got back into my car, and drove the few yards down to my own house. As I parked in the garage, I kept thinking about those weird words. The poor woman was probably just losing her marbles, I thought. Old age, being all alone, the financial stress, all of that could easily mess with a person's mind. I carried my own groceries inside. My husband, Richard, was in the living room watching television. Took you a while, he commented without taking his eyes off the screen. I ran into a neighbor at the store and ended up helping her out, I explained while putting things away in the kitchen. He grumbled something under his breath that I could not make out, and I just let it go. Richard had always been a man of few words, especially over these last few years. I cooked dinner that night, still thinking about my run-in with Betty. Her warning kept echoing in my head, but I kept dismissing it over and over. She was just a confused older lady, trying to repay the favor the only way she knew how with a piece of advice, even if it was complete nonsense. There was no reason to dwell on it. Richard ate his dinner in silence, as usual. He complained that the chicken was too dry, and then headed into his home office to work on some paperwork. I washed the dishes, wiped down the kitchen counters, and finally went up to our bedroom. As I was getting ready for bed, I looked out the window at the front yard. The plants were swaying gently in the night breeze, lit up by the yellowish glow of the street lamp. My garden had always been my pride and joy. I spent years tending to those flowers, pruning the trees, keeping everything immaculate. Roses, hydrangeas, jasmines, and calla lilies. Every single plant had been carefully picked out, every corner of that yard planned to perfection. Richard never cared much for yard work. He said it was a waste of time, but he never stopped me from doing it. It was my sanctuary, my happy place. I laid down in bed, thinking about how ridiculous it would be to avoid looking at my own yard. It was my house, my space, my creation. Why on earth would I avoid something I loved so much? Betty's warning was clearly just the rambling of a tired, confused mind. I decided to drop it and let exhaustion take over. The next morning, I woke up to Richard's alarm going off. He got up, took a quick shower, and threw on his suit just like he did every single day. It was Friday, and he had a big meeting at the corporate office. We ate breakfast in silence, another routine I had gotten completely used to. Our 28 years of marriage had turned into exactly that. A quiet, predictable routine with zero surprises. I am going to be late tonight, he said, grabbing his briefcase and his car keys. I have a dinner with some clients after the board meeting. I nodded, telling him to have a good day, which he barely even acknowledged. The front door shut, and I was alone again. I washed our coffee mugs, tidied up the kitchen, and inevitably, my eyes were drawn to the window overlooking the yard. Betty's words rushed back into my mind with surprising force. When your husband heads off to work, do not look at the plants in the garden. Why specifically after Richard left? Why that exact moment? A weird feeling started to bubble up in my chest, a mix of curiosity and dread that I could not explain. I tried to distract myself. I turned on the morning shows, picked up a book, but I could not focus on anything. My eyes kept drifting back to the window, to the garden outside, bathed in the soft morning light. This was ridiculous. I was letting a confused older woman's rambling get to me. Still, there was something about how intensely she had spoken, the sheer urgency in her whisper, that would not leave me alone. I slowly walked down the stone pathway, checking every corner, every plant, looking for anything out of place, even though I had no idea what I was looking for. It was when I got near the hydrangeas, over by the left corner of the yard, that I spotted it. The dirt there looked different. It was darker, much looser, as if it had been dug up recently. My heart started beating faster. I walked over and dropped to my knees on the grass right next to the flower bed. The soil had definitely been disturbed. I could see the marks, the difference in the texture. Richard never touched the garden, never planted or pruned a single thing. So who had been digging around in there, and when? With shaking hands, I started brushing the dirt away with my fingers. I do not know what I was expecting to find. Maybe a dead animal, or just some rocks, or nothing at all. But as I kept digging, I felt something solid, something that definitely was not a tree root or a stone. It was plastic. A thick, heavy-duty black trash bag. I pulled hard, and the bag started coming out of the dirt. It was heavy and bulky. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it ringing in my ears. With a grunt, I managed to yank it completely out and dragged it onto the grass. My hands were covered in dirt, shaking violently. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm my nerves, trying to work up the courage to open that bag. When I finally untied the knot, keeping the plastic shut and peeked inside, the whole world seemed to stop spinning. It took my brain a few solid seconds to process what my eyes were seeing. Money. A ton of money. Stacks upon stacks of $100 bills, all banded together with rubber bands. On top of that, there was paperwork, passports, and credit cards with names I had never seen before. My hands started shaking so badly, I almost dropped the bag. I sat back on the grass, unable to stand, unable to tear my eyes away from it. What in the world was this? Where did all this cash come from? Why was it buried in my front yard? And the most terrifying question of all, did Richard know about this? Of course he knew. A voice inside my head screamed the answer immediately. He was the only one with access to this yard besides me, and I sure as hell had not buried anything out here. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My husband, the man I had lived with for nearly 3 decades, was keeping secrets. Secrets literally buried in our yard, right under the plants I took such good care of. I just sat there for I do not even know how long, staring at that trash bag like it was a UFO that had crash-landed on my lawn. My mind was spinning in circles, desperately trying to find a logical explanation, a rational excuse for what I was looking at. Maybe Richard had been secretly saving up some money without telling me? But why hide it like this? Why have documents with completely different names? Nothing made sense. Yet at the same time, it all started to make a terrifying amount of sense. I forced myself up on wobbly legs and dragged the heavy bag back inside the house. I locked the back door and leaned against it, breathing heavily like I had just run a marathon. I needed to think. I needed to wrap my head around what was going on before I made any moves. I hauled the bag up to the master bedroom and shoved it into the back of my closet, burying it under some heavy winter blankets we never used. My hands were still trembling when I washed the mud off them in the bathroom sink. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My face was pale, my eyes were wide open, and there was a look of pure shock permanently glued to my features. How did Betty know? That question kept drilling into my brain louder and louder. I grabbed my cell phone. My first instinct was to call Richard and confront him immediately. But then I hesitated. If he was hiding something this massive, this serious, confronting him over the phone would be a terrible idea. He could make up some excuse. He could panic. He could do anything. I needed more facts before I did anything. I needed to see the whole picture. I went back out to the yard, this time carrying a shovel. I started digging in other spots, checking to see if there was anything else hidden. I dug near the roses, under the lilies, around the fruit trees. With every hole I dug, my heart raced, terrified yet half expecting to find more proof of whatever Richard was mixed up in. But there was nothing else. Just that one bag. That one damn bag full of secrets. After 2 hours of digging, I was physically and emotionally completely drained. I went back inside. I took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away not just the dirt, but the absolute dread and confusion eating me alive. Standing under the shower head, I finally let the tears fall, mixing with the hot water running down my face. 28 years of marriage. 28 years sleeping next to a man I apparently did not know at all. As I dried off, I started mentally replaying the last few months, the last few years, searching for red flags I might have completely missed. Richard was always a private guy. He always kept his work life totally separate from our home life. He worked as an executive for an import and export corporation, or at least that is what I thought. He traveled out of state frequently, stayed at the office late, and had bizarre late-night conference calls. I never questioned it. I never suspected a thing, because I trusted him blindly. But now, looking back, it all felt completely different. What were those business trips really for? Were those late nights at the office really about quarterly reports? And all that cash, those shady papers? My God, they were fake IDs. Passports with Richard's face on them, but with entirely different names. My husband had multiple identities. How had I been so blind all these years? I got dressed on autopilot, picking out clothes without even thinking about it, my brain entirely focused on the nightmare sitting in my closet. I needed to talk to Betty. She knew something. That much was obvious. But how? What did she see or figure out? And why warn me in a creepy riddle instead of just spilling the beans and telling me the truth outright? I checked the clock. It was noon. Richard said he would be late because of his dinner with clients, so I had several hours to figure things out before I had to face him. I decided to walk over to Betty's house right then and there. I needed answers, and she was the only person who seemed to have any. I walked down the sidewalk toward her house, every step feeling heavier due to my anxiety. It was a beautiful, sunny day. Kids were playing in their driveways. Neighbors were out watering their lawns. Everything was so painfully normal, while my entire reality was falling apart. I reached her faded blue front door and rang the doorbell. Nothing. I rang it again. Dead silence. I walked around the side of the house, peeking through the windows. The blinds were all drawn tight. There was not a single sign of life inside. I knocked on the back door. I called out her name. Betty. It is me, Linda. I really need to talk to you. My voice sounded strange even to me, heavy with a desperate urgency I could not hide. I waited for a long time, but nobody answered. Frustrated and getting more anxious by the minute, I headed back home. Maybe she went out, though that seemed highly unlikely given how frail she was. I decided I would try again later. In the meantime, I needed to get a closer look at what was in that trash bag. I needed to know exactly what Richard was hiding. I locked my bedroom door, pulled the bag out of the closet, and dumped the whole thing out onto the bed. It took me several minutes just to organize the mess. There was roughly $240,000 in $100 bills, pure, untraceable cash. On top of that, there were 5 different U.S. passports, all featuring Richard's photo, but with completely different names. Michael Lawson, Thomas Sterling, Robert Vance, James Caldwell, William Decker. My stomach churned. This was not just a secret stash of rainy day money. This was major. This was serious. Fake identities and forged government documents meant criminal activity. Smuggling, money laundering, fraud. The possibilities were spinning in my head, each one worse than the last. There were also credit cards matching the fake names, driver's licenses from different states, and even corporate paperwork for LLCs I had never heard of in my entire life. I flipped through every single page with shaking hands, trying to put together the pieces of this sick puzzle. Richard was not just my husband. He was apparently 5 different people, each with a carefully crafted background. I also found a small pocket notebook with yellowing pages covered in messy handwriting. I opened it and started reading. It was full of cryptic notes, numbers that looked like dates, large figures, and initials I did not recognize. I tried to crack the code, but it looked like a foreign language to me. It was painfully obvious that Richard had an entire operation running right alongside the normal life we shared. The pain I felt right then was completely unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was not just the sting of betrayal, although that was soul-crushing on its own. It was the terrifying realization that my entire life, or at least the last 28 years of it, had been built on a massive lie. I did not know my husband. I probably never truly knew him at all. I thought back to our marriage, to how we first met. Richard had been so charming, such a gentleman back then. He did everything by the book, met my parents, took me on real dates. We got married after 2 years of dating, in a beautiful ceremony with all our friends and family. I was so happy, so head over heels in love, dreaming about our big American dream together. Those early years were great. Richard worked a lot, but he always made time for me. We took summer vacations. We went out to nice dinners. We actually talked about our days. We never had kids. I couldn't. We found out about a medical issue right after we tied the knot. Richard told me it did not matter, that I was enough for him. Now I was sick to my stomach, wondering if it had secretly been a relief for him, less baggage holding him down in his double or triple or quintuple life. As the years went by, Richard got more distant. I just blamed it on the stress of climbing the corporate ladder and all his heavy responsibilities. He traveled more, spent more days out of state, and talked a lot less about what he actually did at work. I just filled my days tending to the garden, taking painting classes, and volunteering at our local church. We built separate lives that only ever really crossed paths on the surface, in our daily routines. Did other people know? His coworkers? The guys he played golf with? Was anyone else in on the real Richard? Or had he played them all for fools just as flawlessly as he played me? I felt like an absolute idiot, a naive fool who swallowed everything hook, line, and sinker without ever asking questions, without ever suspecting a single thing. I carefully packed everything back into the trash bag, making sure not a single piece of paper was left behind. I shoved it back into the closet, this time burying it under even more layers of old clothes and blankets. I looked at the clock again. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Richard would not be home until 10 or 11 at night. I had time. I decided I was going to search his home office. Richard always kept that door locked tight whenever he wasn't in there, but I knew exactly where he hid the spare key. It was inside a little ceramic mug in the kitchen, buried under a pile of old coins he collected. I grabbed the key. My hands were not shaking as badly anymore. The panic was being replaced by an ice-cold determination to uncover the whole truth. His office was a very masculine space, decorated with dark mahogany furniture, bookshelves loaded with business and economics books, and a desktop computer sitting on his desk. I sat down in his leather desk chair and started pulling open drawers. The first one was just standard office supplies, pens, paper clips, sticky notes. The second one held normal work documents, contracts, and financial spreadsheets. It was in the third drawer, the deepest one, where I hit the jackpot. A plain black folder with no label, shoved underneath a stack of old magazines. I opened it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside were photographs, a ton of photographs, and what I saw completely knocked the wind out of me. The pictures showed Richard with several different women, all in very intimate settings. Candlelit dinners, walking down the street holding hands, hugging, kissing. There were dates scribbled on the back of some of them, going back as far as 5 years. 5 years of hard evidence of him cheating on me, carefully filed away in a folder he kept right here in our own house. What an absolute piece of garbage. My vision blurred with tears that flat out refused to fall. I was way past crying at that point. I was in such a deep state of shock that crying felt useless. I analyzed every single photo with almost scientific precision, memorizing their faces, trying to figure out who these women were. Some looked around my age. Others were obviously way younger. A blonde, a brunette, a redhead. Richard, apparently, did not discriminate. There were also hotel receipts, reservations for high-end steakhouses, receipts for jewelry, designer clothes, and expensive perfumes. Everything was meticulously archived, almost as if he was keeping a record of his own infidelity. But why? Why keep such damning evidence? Unless it was for blackmail, or some kind of insurance policy, or some sick reason I could not even begin to comprehend. I kept digging through the rest of the drawers and eventually found a second cell phone stashed behind a row of books on the shelf. It was a newer smartphone, totally different from the one he normally carried. I tried to turn it on, but the battery was dead. I dug around for a compatible charger, found one in the bottom drawer, and plugged it into the wall. While I waited for the phone to juice up, I turned my attention to the desktop computer. I hit the power button, but it immediately asked for a password. I tried the obvious ones: our anniversary, my birthday, his birthday. Nothing worked. Of course it wouldn't. Richard was way too careful to use an easy password on a computer that clearly held his darkest secrets. The burner phone powered up after a few minutes. The lock screen was just a generic stock photo of a landscape, nothing personal. I tried swiping to unlock it, but it demanded a passcode. I punched in a few numbers, but after 3 failed attempts, the phone demanded an extra security pin. I threw in the towel and left it alone for the time being, terrified I would permanently lock the device. I went back to the photos, looking at them much closer. In one of them, I caught something in the background. A street sign. I pulled the picture right up to my face, squinting to read the lettering. It was a street located right in downtown Chicago, a neighborhood I practically never went to. Was that where Richard was meeting up with these women? Did he have a secret apartment, a whole other piece of his double life stashed away downtown? Sitting there, Listening to the dead silence of the empty house all around me, I felt completely alone in the world. My parents had passed away years ago. I was an only child. The few close friends I had were mostly people I knew through Richard couples we grabbed dinner with on the weekends, but nobody I had ever built a real, deep connection with. Who could I go to? Who could I trust? I thought about going straight to the cops. But with what, exactly? Cash buried in the backyard? That is not necessarily a crime on its own. The fake IDs? That would mean turning in my own husband, and I still did not even fully understand what he was mixed up in. Cheating on me was not illegal, no matter how much it destroyed my soul. I needed more leverage before I made a move like that. I packed everything back exactly how I found it, making absolutely sure I didn't leave a single trace that I had been snooping around. I locked the office door and dropped the key back into the ceramic mug. I paced around the house, which suddenly felt incredibly foreign, hostile, loaded with secrets crammed into every corner. How much more was Richard hiding? How many more lies were waiting to explode in my face? I tried to force down some lunch, but the sandwich tasted like dry cardboard. I brewed a pot of coffee, but let it go completely cold on the counter without taking a single sip. I flicked on the television without paying an ounce of attention to what was on the screen. My brain was completely hijacked, processing and reprocessing everything I had uncovered over the last few hours. At 5 o'clock in the evening, I marched back over to Betty's house. This time, to my complete surprise, she opened the door. But the woman staring back at me wasn't the frail, timid old lady I had helped at the grocery store. Her eyes were sharp, her posture much straighter. There was an intense energy radiating off her that I had never noticed before. "I knew you would be back," she said, holding the door open just a crack. "Come inside, hurry." She peered down the street like she was checking for spies, and then moved aside to let me in. I stepped into a tiny, dim living room stuffed with old, worn-out furniture. The place smelled like mothballs and some kind of medicinal ointment I couldn't place. "How did you know?" were the first words I managed to get out. "About the yard? About what was buried out there? How did you know?" My voice cracked, way louder than I intended, bursting with all the pent-up emotion from the last few hours. Betty sank into a faded armchair and gestured for me to sit on the sofa across from her. "I saw him," she said bluntly. "A few weeks ago. I could not sleep. I get terrible insomnia, you know how it is." She pointed a shaky finger toward the front window. "When I saw your husband in your front yard, it was the middle of the night. He was digging, burying something. I felt my stomach tie into knots all over again. Why didn't you just tell me straight up? Why the cryptic warning?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Because I was not sure if you were already in on it, if you were part of the whole scheme," she replied, her eyes locking onto mine. Some wives know exactly what their husbands are up to and choose to look the other way. I did not want to stir the pot if that was the case. "But when you were so sweet to me at the store, when you paid for my groceries without expecting a single thing in return, I realized you are a good person. You deserve to know the truth. Do you know what my husband does? Do you know why he has all that cash hidden and all those fake passports?" My questions came spilling out of my mouth in a panicked rush. She slowly shook her head. "I do not know the exact details, but I see things. I hear things. Your husband gets some very strange visitors sometimes whenever you are out of the house. Fancy luxury cars pull up to your driveway, guys in expensive suits walk in and out in a flash. They do not look like regular friendly visits." She paused to catch her breath, and then went on. "And a few months back, I saw one of those visitors show up late at night. There was a shouting match, loud voices. I got worried. I almost dialed 911, but then it all went dead quiet again. I soaked that information in, sitting in total silence. Richard had an entire criminal enterprise operating right under my nose, inside my own home, and I had been completely blind to it. How could I have been so utterly stupid? "Is there anything else you saw or heard?" I asked. Betty hesitated, biting down on her bottom lip. "There is a woman who shows up sometimes. Younger, very pretty, dark hair. She comes over right after you leave and stays for a few hours. I am so sorry I have to be the one to tell you this, honey. But you needed to know." Those words confirmed exactly what the pictures had already shown me, but they still stung like a slap in the face. "Does she still come around?" I managed to choke out, even though I knew I did not want to hear the answer. I saw her last week. Thursday, I think. She got there around noon and drove off around 3. The exact same Thursday I ran into Betty at the grocery store. While I was out being a good Samaritan and helping my neighbor, my husband was in our bed with his mistress. I stood up. I suddenly needed to get out of there. I desperately needed some fresh air. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice sounding hollow and disconnected. "Thank you for caring enough to warn me, even if it was just a riddle." She stood up too, placing her wrinkled hand over mine. "You watch your back, sweetheart. Men who hide secrets that big have a lot to lose if they get caught red-handed. They can become very dangerous when they are backed into a corner. Do not confront him all by yourself, not without having some kind of backup or witnesses." Her words sent a freezing chill straight down my spine. Dangerous. My husband could be dangerous. That thought had literally never crossed my mind before, but now it felt terrifyingly real. A man with multiple fake identities, huge sums of hidden cash, and ties to guys driving luxury cars. Who knew what he was actually capable of? "I will be careful," I promised, even though I had absolutely no idea how I was going to pull that off. Betty walked me to the front door. Before stepping outside, I turned to look at her one last time. "Why do you live all alone in such a tough situation? Do you have any family?" Her face tightened, a heavy shadow of sorrow crossing her eyes. "I had a family once, a husband, 2 kids. My husband had his own secrets. He hid things from me too. When it all finally blew up, they threw him in prison. The government seized everything we owned, and my children grew up so ashamed of their father that they cut me out of their lives completely. I was left with nothing, paying the price for the sins of a man I thought I knew." She paused. "That is exactly why I recognize the red flags, dear. That is why I wanted to warn you before it was too late." I walked away from her house with a massive weight on my chest, carrying not just my own nightmare, but now Betty's tragic history as well. Was that what was waiting for me? A lonely, broke future, abandoned by everyone after the ugly truth about Richard hit the fan? The thought alone was paralyzing. I walked back home just as the sun was starting to set, turning the sky beautiful shades of orange and pink. It was a gorgeous view, but I was completely incapable of enjoying it. My brain was buzzing with strategies, worst-case scenarios, and pure terror. What was I supposed to do with all this information? How was I supposed to handle this? Every single option I brainstormed seemed to bring its own set of dangers and complications. I walked inside and went straight upstairs to the bedroom. I dragged the trash bag out of the closet again and counted the cash much more carefully this time. $243,000 to be exact. A staggering amount of money to just bury in the dirt. I inspected the bills, looking for any ink marks or consecutive serial numbers that might prove they were counterfeit or stolen from a bank, but they looked perfectly legit. I grabbed one of the passports and held it up to the bedroom light. The forgery, if it even was a forgery, was top tier. I could not spot a single glaring flaw compared to a real U.S. passport. The holograms caught the light perfectly. The photo was seamlessly printed. The customs stamps from various foreign countries looked completely authentic. Richard, or whoever was manufacturing these documents for him, had access to incredibly sophisticated resources. I fired up my own laptop and started running Google searches on the fake names. Michael Lawson, Thomas Sterling, Robert Vance. They were all way too common to pull up any specific hits. I tried combining them with keywords like import, export, fraud, smuggling, but nothing led to a solid connection. If Richard was running a criminal empire, he made damn sure not to leave a digital footprint. I debated hiring a private investigator, someone who could professionally look into Richard and uncover exactly what his business was, but that meant dragging a third party into this and creating more exposure. What if the PI was shady? What if he accidentally tipped Richard off? No, I had to play this smarter than that. I decided my best move was to confront him, but absolutely not before I had a rock-solid exit strategy. I needed to secure my own finances, secure a safe place to crash, and consult a divorce attorney about how to protect myself if Richard went to prison or the feds seized our assets, just like what happened to Betty's husband. I logged into my online banking portal and checked my balance. Richard had always insisted on keeping our bank accounts separate, which at the time just felt like a sign of independence. But now I saw it for what it truly was, another way to hide his shady money moves. I had about $50,000 saved up over the decades, mostly from a small inheritance when my mother passed, and the cash I managed to stash away from the monthly allowance Richard gave me. Allowance? What an ugly word for a 55-year-old married woman. Richard handled all the big bills, paid the mortgage, and made all the major financial decisions. I was only in charge of grocery shopping and small personal expenses, yet another control tactic that I had swallowed without a fight, wrapped up in the excuse that he was just a numbers guy and didn't want me stressing over the bills. I started making a mental checklist of every single thing I needed to do. First, document every piece of evidence I found. Take clear photos of the cash, the passports, the paperwork in his office. Second, wire my money to a brand new account that Richard had zero access to, preferably at a completely different bank. Third, track down a shark of a divorce lawyer and probably a criminal defense attorney to cover my own back. Fourth, I find a safe place to lay low just in case I had to pack my bags and run in a flash. I grabbed my smartphone and started snapping pictures of everything. Every single passport page, every LLC document, the stacks of cash spread across my duvet, the cryptic pages from the pocket notebook. I created a hidden, password-protected folder on my phone and dumped everything into it. Then, I backed it all up to a cloud drive connected to an email address Richard did not know existed. At least now I had hard proof, something tangible just in case things went sideways. It was 8 o'clock at night by the time I finished documenting everything and hid the bag again. Richard was scheduled to be home in a few hours. I had to act completely normal, to pretend that absolutely nothing had changed. But how on earth do you fake being normal when your entire universe has been flipped upside down? I tossed together a light salad for dinner, even though I could barely swallow a bite. I took a long, steaming bath, trying to force my tense muscles to relax, mentally rehearsing exactly how I was going to act when Richard walked through the door. Could I actually look him in the eye and not betray everything I knew? Could I make small talk like we were still just an average suburban couple on a Tuesday night? At 10:30, I heard the garage door rumble open. My heart immediately went into overdrive. My mouth went completely dry. I took several deep breaths, fighting to keep my composure. I was sitting on the living room couch, the television tuned to some random sitcom that I wasn't actually watching. Richard walked in, his tie loosened, looking totally exhausted. "Hey," he said, tossing his leather briefcase onto the love seat. That dinner dragged on forever. The clients wanted to nitpick every single line of the contract. His voice sounded so casual, so completely normal, without a single trace of guilt or paranoia. "Did you get it all sorted out?" I managed to ask, my own voice surprisingly steady. He nodded, walking toward the kitchen. "I am grabbing a cold beer. You want anything?" "No, I am good, thanks," I replied, watching him navigate the house with the easy familiarity of a man who had lived there for decades. It was a total mind trip watching him act so casual when I knew the monster hiding underneath. How did he keep that mask from slipping? He walked back in with his beer and dropped onto the recliner. "How was your day?" he asked, a question he threw out almost every night. Just another line in the script of our life together. Usually, I would reply with something mundane. "I went to the store. I weeded the garden. I read a few chapters of my book." Today, the brutal irony of that question almost made me laugh out loud. "Quiet," I replied, forcing my tone to stay light. "I did some yard work this morning, read for a bit. Nothing crazy. Every word was a lie. Every single syllable was a massive effort to keep my mask from slipping." Richard sipped his beer in silence, staring at the television without really watching it. I observed him out of the corner of my eye, trying to look past the facade, trying to spot the criminal who buried cash in the dirt, who forged identities, who was out cheating on me constantly. But all I saw was the same old Richard, a middle-aged guy, a few extra pounds around the middle, salt and pepper hair, and crow's feet around his eyes. "I am going to shower and hit the sack," he announced after draining his beer. "I have to be at the corporate office early tomorrow to run through some numbers." He stood up, leaned over, and gave me an absent-minded peck on the top of the head, a gesture so incredibly automatic he probably didn't even realize he did it, and walked upstairs. I sat frozen on the couch, listening to the shower turn on in the master bathroom right above me. That was my husband, the man I shared a bed with every single night, the man I shared a home and 28 years of history with, and he was a total, absolute stranger. I waited until I heard the water shut off, then the muffled sounds of Richard getting ready for bed. When I was absolutely sure he was under the covers, I crept quietly up the stairs. I walked into the bedroom and saw he was already bundled up, his back turned toward my side of the mattress. I threw on my pajamas in the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and went through my entire nighttime routine on pure autopilot. I climbed into bed next to him, keeping as much physical distance between us as I could without making it weird. I could hear his breathing slow down and get heavier as he drifted off to sleep. How could he sleep so soundly? How did his conscience not keep him up all night? I lay awake for hours, staring up at the dark ceiling, listening to Richard snore softly. My brain was running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, processing, planning, panicking. Eventually, sheer exhaustion knocked me out, but it was a restless sleep, plagued by chaotic nightmares of gardens splitting open like graves, passports multiplying infinitely, and Richard wearing a different face in every single one. I woke up to his alarm blaring at 6 in the morning. Richard rolled out of bed and went through his morning routine with the precision of a Swiss watch: shower, shave, coffee, scrolling through the morning news on his iPad. I played dead, pretending to still be asleep, watching him through slitted eyes. He walked out without saying goodbye, which was normal when he thought I was still knocked out. The exact second I heard his SUV pull out of the driveway, I jumped out of bed. Today was the day. Today I was putting my exit plan into motion, mapping out my strategy to survive this nightmare. But first, I needed a professional. I needed someone I could trust, someone who could give me hard legal advice. I remembered Susan, an old friend from the days when I still worked an office job before I married Richard. We had lost touch over the years, but she was a high-powered lawyer specializing in family law. If anyone could navigate this mess, it was her. I Googled her name, and to my immense relief, found her law firm right away. Her office was only 20 minutes from my house. I called the moment the firm opened at 9 o'clock. A receptionist answered with a crisp, professional voice, asking for the nature of my call. I hesitated, not wanting to spill the details over an unsecure line. It is a highly sensitive personal matter. I am an old friend of Susan's. I really need to consult with her as soon as humanly possible. There was a brief hold while the receptionist checked the calendar. Susan has an opening at 3 o'clock in the afternoon today. Does that work for you? It was better than fine. It was perfect. I confirmed the time, gave my full name, and hung up with a massive wave of relief washing over me. I was finally taking concrete action. I spent the rest of the morning forcing myself to stay busy. I scrubbed the house from top to bottom, ran loads of laundry, and meal prepped food I knew I would never eat. Anything to keep my mind locked in and dodge the sheer panic that threatened to swallow me whole every time I paused to think about what I was up against. At 2:30, I put on a nice outfit, slacks, a conservative blouse, sensible flats, and drove downtown to Susan's firm. The building was stunning, all sleek glass and polished marble. Her firm took up the entire 10th floor, boasting a gorgeous view of the downtown skyline. The waiting room was incredibly tasteful, plush modern couches, fresh magazines neatly fanned out on a glass coffee table. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile and offered me a seat. I sank into a soft leather chair, flipping through a magazine without reading a single word, my heart hammering with nerves and anticipation. I was about to take the very first official step toward blowing up my marriage, destroying my life as I knew it. Susan walked out right on the dot at 3 o'clock. She looked a bit different from the last time we grabbed drinks. Her hair was cropped into a sharp bob, dusted with a few silver streaks, and she had smile lines around her eyes. But her smile was identical, warm, and totally genuine. "Linda, it has been ages," she cried, pulling me into a tight hug. "Come on back, please." Her corner office was massive, anchored by a huge mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with legal texts, and that killer view of the city. We sat down on a pair of comfortable armchairs in a small sitting area, away from the intimidating desk. "So," Susan began, her face dropping into a serious, professional expression. My receptionist flagged this as urgent. "What is going on, Linda?" And then I completely spilled my guts. The words poured out of me like a busted dam. Running into Betty, the creepy warning, digging up the trash bag in the yard, the forged passports, the sickening photos in the hidden folder, my gut feeling about him running a criminal enterprise. Susan listened in dead silence, jotting notes on a legal pad every so often, keeping her face totally neutral and strictly professional. When I finally ran out of breath, I felt this bizarre sense of relief, like unloading this nightmare onto someone else's shoulders made the crushing weight just a little bit lighter. Susan sat quietly for a moment, reviewing her notes. Then she looked me dead in the eye. "Linda, you have stepped into a massive minefield," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "First things first, the criminal element. You need a heavy-hitting criminal defense attorney, not just a divorce lawyer. Your husband's mess could easily drag you down with him, even if you were completely in the dark. I know a guy who is phenomenal at this kind of defense." I felt my stomach drop straight to the floor. Criminally implicated. I had not even fully grasped that I could go down for this, but I did not know a thing. I pleaded. "I have zero involvement in whatever scheme he is running." "I believe you 100%, Susan replied. "But in the eyes of the law, you are his wife. Your name is on the deed to the house where the evidence is buried. You need an ironclad legal shield. You need to prove you were entirely innocent and oblivious to his hustle." She took a breath. "As for the divorce, given the hard proof of infidelity and the suspected felonies, you have a bulletproof case. But we have to be incredibly strategic about this." "Strategic how?" I asked, leaning closer. "First, you lock down your cash. Wire your money to a standalone account, ideally at a completely different bank, and you do it today. Second, we get everything on the official record. I am drafting a sworn affidavit documenting every single thing you just told me. Third, and this is life or death, you do not breathe a word of this to your husband until we have our ducks in a row." "Why not?" I asked, though my gut already knew the terrifying answer. Because men running illegal empires can get incredibly volatile when they realize their cover is blown. He might try to intimidate you. He might burn the evidence. He might even flee the country. He has forged passports, Linda, that makes vanishing off the grid a cakewalk for him. Susan leaned forward, gently placing her hands over mine. "We are going to do this by the book, keeping you safe at every single turn." I nodded, feeling the dam finally break as the tears streamed down my face. All through this nightmare of a day, I had kept up a brave face, staying totally numb. But right here, in this safe room, sitting with someone who actively had my back, the walls finally came down. Susan slid a box of tissues across the table and waited quietly while I pulled myself together. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, dabbing at my eyes. It is just so much to process." "Do not apologize," she said softly. "You are dealing with a catastrophic betrayal on every possible front, personal, financial, legal. Anyone would be in pieces right now. But you are tough, Linda. You survived this long. You dug up the truth by yourself, and you walked in here to get help. That takes serious guts." Her words offered a sliver of comfort, a shot of much-needed courage. "What is my next move?" I asked. "Next," Susan said, flipping open her planner, "we are booking a sit-down for tomorrow morning with that criminal defense attorney I mentioned. His name is David Mitchell. He is a shark. In the meantime, you march over to a bank right now, secure your funds, and play it completely cool at home tonight. Can you handle that?" "I can," I replied, sounding a lot braver than I actually felt. Susan smiled, an empowering grin that fueled my confidence. "Awesome. I will also start drafting the preliminary divorce filings, but we are keeping them locked in the vault for now. We are not making a single move until the board is completely set." She jotted something down. "You said you took photos of the stash, right?" I pulled out my smartphone and pulled up the hidden folder. Susan inspected each photo with a critical eye, scribbling furiously on her legal pad. "Excellent. This is going to save us. You were incredibly smart to document the scene." She handed the phone back. "Keep that cloud backup active, but forward copies to my encrypted email right now. I am locking them down in our secure servers." We spent another hour hammering out the logistics, talking strategy, and running through worst-case scenarios. When I finally walked out of those glass doors at 5 o'clock, my brain was completely fried, but I felt bizarrely lighter. I wasn't fighting this war alone anymore. I had a squad, high-powered professionals steering the ship. I drove straight to a major bank franchise across town, one Richard and I had never used. I opened a solo checking account and wired every single penny from my old account into it. $50,000 was not a fortune, but it was mine. It was secure. It was the foundation I needed to restart my life. When I pulled into my driveway, Richard's SUV was already parked in the garage, which was incredibly rare for this time of day. My heart instantly spiked, but I forced my face into a mask of total calm. "You are home early," I casually remarked, slipping off my flats. "Afternoon meeting got bumped," he explained, completely glued to his iPad. Decided to clock in from the home office for the rest of the day. He was sitting in his office, and the door was wide open, another major red flag. "I'll start dinner," I called out, walking into the kitchen. My hands had a slight tremor as I chopped the vegetables, but I kept my movements deliberate and smooth. I had to play the part. I couldn't let a single micro-expression give away that the game was up. During dinner, Richard was surprisingly chatty. He talked about office politics, a news article he read on Wall Street, and even asked about my afternoon with actual interest. Every question ratcheted up my anxiety, making me paranoid that he was on to me, that he noticed my act slipping. "I headed downtown today," I replied casually. "Caught up with an old girlfriend, grabbed lunch. It was nice to just gossip for a bit. It wasn't a total lie. Susan was an old friend. We just skipped the lunch part." "That is great," Richard said, sounding genuinely thrilled. "You should get out of the house more, be social. Sometimes I worry you turn into a hermit cooped up in this subdivision all day." The sheer audacity of that statement, him telling me to get a social life while he ran an entire shadow existence behind my back, almost made me burst out laughing right at the dinner table. After we cleared the plates, he retreated back to his office. I heard him making hushed phone calls, his voice too muffled to catch the words. But the cadence sounded strictly business. I sat in the living room, faking interest in the television, while my brain sprinted through the day's events. Tomorrow's meeting with Susan and the defense attorney was going to be the turning point. I had to be sharp. I had to lay out the timeline again. I had to build my alibi. That night, I laid in bed next to Richard once again, but this time I did not feel like a helpless victim. I had a blueprint. I had legal muscle. I had taken the first major strides to bulletproof my future. It was still a living nightmare. The pain was still gut-wrenching, but at least I was off the sidelines. I wasn't just sitting around waiting for the bomb to go off anymore. Richard crashed quickly, snoring like a baby. I stayed awake for a long time, watching the tree branches from the front yard cast creeping shadows across the bedroom ceiling. My garden, the spot that used to be my peaceful oasis, was now radioactive with Richard's dirt. Every rosebush, every patch of soil just screamed at me, reminding me of the horror buried underneath. The next morning, Richard was out the door bright and early. The second I heard the garage door shut, I sprang out of bed and started getting ready for the war room. I picked out a sharp, conservative blazer. I wanted David Mitchell to know I meant business. I brewed a pot of coffee but couldn't stomach a real breakfast. My stomach was doing backflips. I walked into Susan's lobby, 15 minutes early. Criminal defense attorney David Mitchell was already waiting in the conference room. He was a tall, lean guy in his early 60s, rocking a full head of silver hair, immaculate posture, and razor-sharp eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He gave me a firm handshake and a tight, strictly business smile. The strategy session dragged on for almost 3 solid hours. I laid out the entire story from top to bottom, filling in every microscopic detail. Mitchell grilled me with surgical precision dates, timestamps, the exact dollar amounts, the names on the IDs. Susan sat right beside me, taking furious notes and chiming in on how this impacted the divorce assets. "Linda," Mitchell said, leaning back in his leather chair when I finally finished, "based on everything you just laid out, your husband is knee-deep in a major money laundering operation, likely running wire fraud, and absolutely committing federal felonies with those forged passports. Just possessing those fake IDs is enough to trigger a massive federal raid." I felt the blood drain from my face. Hearing a heavy-hitting defense lawyer confirm my worst nightmares made the whole thing agonizingly real. And me? Can the feds drag me down for this? Not if we play offense, he shot back immediately. You uncovered the stash, you documented the scene, and you retained legal counsel within 24 hours. That establishes a clear track record of innocence. I am drafting a sworn affidavit for you to sign today, outlining the exact timeline of your discovery and your immediate legal actions. That document is your bulletproof vest. But there is a catch, Mitchell continued, resting his elbows on the conference table. We have to strongly consider taking this straight to law enforcement. You are currently harboring evidence of federal crimes on your property. If the feds bust him through a wiretap and discover you knew about the stash, they could charge you as an accessory after the fact or for obstruction of justice. The room literally started spinning. Going to the cops means, I trailed off, a lump forming in my throat. It means your husband gets raided, indicted, and very likely serves hard time in federal prison, Susan finished gently. It means your entire private life becomes a public circus. It means the absolute, explosive end of your marriage. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to swallow the reality of it all. It was one thing to know Richard had to pay the piper for his crimes. It was a completely different nightmare being the one pulling the trigger to send the SWAT team to my front door. Even after the fake names, the dirty money, the years of cheating, he had still been my husband for 28 years. A sick, broken part of me still cared. The thought of watching him get shoved into the back of a cruiser in handcuffs still made my chest ache. You do not have to pull the trigger today, Mitchell said, reading the panic on my face. But the clock is ticking loudly. Every single day you sit on this information without blowing the whistle, your own legal exposure skyrockets. I am strongly advising you to make a final call within the next 7 days max. Is there any other way out? Ibigel, praying for a loophole. Mitchell and Susan locked eyes for a second. Technically, Susan sighed. You could just file for a standard divorce and keep your mouth shut about the felonies. But that leaves a massive target on your back. If the FBI brings him down next year and they trace it back to the house, you are an unindicted co-conspirator. Plus, without flipping on him, you have zero guarantee the DOJ won't seize your house and freeze your bank accounts. And then there is the ethical reality, Mitchell added bluntly. If your husband is washing cartel cash or corporate fraud money, he is greasing the wheels for serious, violent syndicates. Letting this slide makes you complicit in whatever poison those groups are pushing. I knew they were right. Legally, morally, and financially, dropping the hammer on Richard was my only viable exit strategy. It was not a matter of if I would turn him in, but when and how. But the sheer gravity of that choice felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Can I just have a couple of days to sleep on it? I pleaded. I just need a minute to breathe. Absolutely, Susan said, giving my arm a reassuring squeeze. But do not drag your feet, Linda. We have to protect you first and foremost. Mitchell gave a stiff nod. He then walked me through the exact logistics of how we would execute the tip-off to the feds once I gave the green light. I walked out of that skyscraper feeling completely hollowed out. I drove around the city aimlessly for an hour, eventually pulling into a suburban park. I sat on a wooden bench under a massive oak tree and just watched the world go by, kids swinging on the monkey bars, young couples jogging on the trail, normal people living their perfectly boring lives while mine was actively burning to the ground. The longer I sat there, the clearer the brutal truth became. I had zero options. Flipping on Richard was the only way I walked away from this without wearing an orange jumpsuit. But before I made that call, I needed one last thing. Answers. Answers that only Richard could give me. I decided I was going to confront him that very night. I was completely done playing house. I could not spend another night sharing a mattress with a ghost. Susan had explicitly warned me to hold off, but I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to look him dead in the eyes and hear him confess. No matter how much it ripped my heart out, I pulled into my driveway late that afternoon and went straight into prep mode. I stuffed my vital documents into a tote bag, my passport, my birth certificate, the deed to the house, my insurance policies. I tossed the tote into the trunk of my car, alongside an overnight duffel bag packed with clothes and toiletries. If this blew up in my face, if Richard turned violent, I was putting the car in reverse and never looking back. I threw together a simple dinner, but my stomach was tied in so many knots, I dumped my plate into the trash. At 8 o'clock at night, the front door clicked open. Richard walked in looking incredibly stressed. His shoulders were hiked up to his ears, completely tight. "We need to talk," I announced the second he stepped onto the hardwood. My voice projected stronger than I ever thought possible, backed by a fierce, cold rage I didn't even know was inside me. Richard froze in his tracks, his eyes locking onto mine. For a split second, I saw the mask slip. Panic? Fear? It vanished too fast to tell. "About what?" he asked, keeping his tone dead flat. "About the secrets you have been hiding. About the $250,000 buried in my flower bed. About the fake IDs. About the women you are sleeping with." Every sentence was a bullet. Every word was a siren, screaming that his cover was permanently blown. The color instantly drained from Richard's face. He stood absolutely paralyzed for a few agonizing seconds, and then, right before my eyes, his legs just gave out. He slumped against the drywall, sliding down until he hit the floor, burying his face in his hands. "How did you find out?" were the first words out of his mouth. So weak I almost had to read his lips. No denying it, no gaslighting, no spinning a web of lies. Just a pathetic, defeated question. "Does it even matter?" I snapped back, my voice laced with venom. "Does it matter how I found out? Or does it matter that for the last 28 years you lied straight to my face about who you are and what you do?" Richard lifted his head, and I saw tears streaming down his cheeks. Tears. I hadn't seen the man cry once in 3 decades. "Linda, I never wanted you to find out. I never wanted to drag you down into this. So, it was all real. Even with the trash bag full of cash and the photos burned into my retinas, a tiny fraction of my heart had still been praying for a miracle, some crazy, innocent explanation that would make this all a big misunderstanding. Everything. The cash, the fake identities, the felonies. It is all real." He gave a slow, miserable nod, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. "It is real," he whispered. "But it is not what you think. Not entirely." "Then enlighten me," I challenged, crossing my arms over my chest. "Explain to me how any of this is different from exactly what it looks like. Explain how you run 5 separate aliases, bury duffel bags of cash in our yard, and still claim you are not the bad guy." Richard took a ragged breath. He rubbed his hands over his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier, grounded in reality. "Do you really want to know? The whole ugly truth?" There was a weird edge of defiance in his voice that threw me off. Obviously, I shot back ice cold. He pushed himself off the floor, walked into the living room, and collapsed onto the sofa. I followed him, but stayed planted near the archway, keeping a clear shot to the front door just in case. "It all started 15 years ago," he began, staring at the coffee table. "The firm I was working for was bleeding money, deep in the red. They were gearing up for massive layoffs. I was 37, Linda, too old to start from scratch at a new firm, too young to cash out my 401k. I didn't say a word, just glaring at him until he kept going. Then one of our international clients approached me with a side hustle. He needed a guy to smooth over some logistics, wiring funds across borders through shell accounts. At first, it sounded like white-collar consulting. I convinced myself I was just exploiting tax loopholes, nothing strictly illegal. "Money laundering," I interrupted, cutting straight through the corporate garbage. "You are describing international money laundering." "Yes," he confessed, finally meeting my gaze. Eventually, I figured out exactly whose money I was washing. But by the time I realized I was in bed with the devil, I was making so much cash, I could not walk away. And the guys writing the checks? They do not let you just put in your 2 weeks' notice. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. What kind of guys? Dangerous guys, Linda. Cartel guys. People running syndicates you do not ever want to read about. I was just a mid-level accountant for a massive, violent machine. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, wringing his hands. The passports were my bug-out plan. If the feds kicked in the door, or if the cartel decided I was a liability, I needed a way to vanish off the grid instantly. "And the girls?" I demanded, my voice cracking despite my iron grip on my emotions. "How do they factor into your little survival story?" Richard squeezed his eyes shut, There is zero excuse for that. Cheating on you was entirely my own selfish failure. The isolation, the constant paranoia, living a double life. I used all of that to justify it in my head, but it is inexcusable. I broke my vows, Linda, and no apology is ever going to fix that. His confession was supposed to feel like closure. It was supposed to feel like vindication. But all I felt was a gaping, bleeding hole in my chest where my marriage used to be. Did you ever even try to pull the plug? I asked. In 15 years, did you ever once think about coming clean to the feds, taking a plea deal, and living an honest life? Every single day, he replied, his voice breaking. Every damn day. But I was trapped, Linda. Hooked on the cash, terrified of the cartel, paralyzed by the threats that they would come after my family if I tried to rat them out. And the deeper I got, the more impossible it was to find an exit. So you just kept the con going. You kept lying to my face, playing the perfect suburban husband while washing blood money. I felt the tears finally spill over, hot and angry, the tears I had been choking back since the second he walked through the door. I love you, Linda. The words tore out of his throat like a desperate, pathetic plea. I know it sounds like a joke right now. I know my track record says the exact opposite. But I do. I always have. You were the only genuine thing I had left, the only pure thing in this entire nightmare. No, I fired back, aggressively swiping the tears off my cheeks. You do not love me. You do not love someone and lie to their face every morning for 15 years. You do not love someone and make them a potential accessory to a federal indictment. You do not love someone and sleep around on them for half a decade. That is not love, Richard. I do not know what the hell it is, but it sure isn't love. He dropped his head, his shoulders totally slumped in absolute defeat. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice barely audible. I am filing for a divorce, I declared, my voice finding its steel again, and I am handing everything over to the feds. Every dollar, every passport, every single LLC document. His head snapped up in sheer panic. Linda? No. Please. You do not understand the blowback. If the cartel finds out I got burned, they will put a hit out on anyone connected to me, and that includes you. Well, maybe you should have factored that into your business plan before using my backyard as a cartel piggy bank, I snarled. You had 15 years to make the right call. Now I am making mine. Please. He jumped up and lunged a step toward me. I instantly jumped back, my hand diving into my tote bag to grab my phone. He froze immediately, throwing his hands up in the air like he was under arrest. Please, Linda, just give me 7 days. Give me 1 week to mitigate this fallout, to negotiate a deal so we do not end up in a ditch. After that, you can drop the hammer. I stared at him, weighing my options. 1 week. 7 days. Mitchell and Susan had explicitly given me a 1-week deadline to go to the Department of Justice anyway. 1 week, I finally agreed. But you are sleeping in the guest bedroom starting tonight, and I want full transparency on exactly what moves you are making to end this. Richard nodded furiously, looking like a man who just got a stay of execution. Yes, whatever you want. Thank you, Linda. Thank you for not throwing me to the wolves tonight. I didn't say another word. I just turned my back, marched up the stairs, and locked myself inside the master bedroom. I heard Richard pacing the downstairs floors for hours, eventually trudging up the stairs and shutting himself inside the guest room at the far end of the hallway. I dragged a heavy oak chair and wedged it under my doorknob, a paranoid security measure I never in my wildest dreams thought I would need inside my own home. I collapsed onto the mattress, the sheer adrenaline crash finally hitting me like a freight train. My whole body started shaking. I sobbed uncontrollably into my pillow. 28 years. 15 of them built on a foundation of pure fraud. How was I supposed to bounce back? How does a 55-year-old woman start over, entirely alone, with a potential cartel target painted on her back? But pushing past the sheer terror, pushing past the agonizing heartbreak, a tiny spark lit up in my chest. Liberation. I finally saw the monster hiding in the dark, no matter how hideous it was. I was finally back in the driver's seat of my own life. I was calling the shots based on hard facts, not living blindly in a comfortable lie. The next few days were the most bizarre, tension-filled days of my entire life. Richard and I were existing under the same roof, but operating in completely separate universes. He spent 18 hours a day locked inside his office, making frantic burner phone calls, aggressively typing on his encrypted laptop. I kept my distance, watching him like a hawk, keeping my go-bag by the front door, bracing for impact. Susan called my cell every single afternoon for a status update. I briefed her on the confrontation and the 7-day grace period I granted him. She was absolutely furious. She lectured me about the physical danger I was in, but ultimately she respected my call. David Mitchell drafted the federal whistleblower complaints and the divorce petition, keeping them chambered and ready to fire at a moment's notice. On the 4th night after the blowout, Richard knocked on the living room door frame. He looked like he had aged a decade in 96 hours. He had dark, bruised bags under his eyes, a scruffy beard, and was wearing the same wrinkled dress shirt from 2 days ago. "Can we talk?" he asked hesitantly, hovering near the archway while I was sitting on the couch reading a novel. I snapped the book shut. "Talk." He stepped inside but stayed near the door, keeping a respectful distance. "I cut a deal with the Department of Justice. I am flipping. I am handing over the entire ledger, the bosses, the offshore accounts, the shell corporations. In exchange for what?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Full immunity and entry into the witness security program. For both of us, if you want it." I sat there, letting those words process. "You are going to testify against cartel bosses in open court? It is the only play I have left," he said grimly. "The only way we do not end up at the bottom of a lake. The FBI has been building a RICO case against this syndicate for years. My ledgers give them the smoking gun to take down the entire board." He took a shaky breath. "But it means burning everything to the ground. A completely fake identity, relocated to a random city, starting over with zero ties to our old life. And you actually think I am getting on that bus with you?" I asked, staring at him in total disbelief. "After the cheating, the lies, the money laundering, you think we are just going to ride off into the sunset under new names?" "No," he answered quickly, holding his hands up. "I am not delusional. I know I permanently blew it. But I negotiated the protection detail for you as an option. If you want to finalize the divorce and walk away, I will sign the papers tomorrow. But I had to make sure the U.S. Marshals would cover you." I stood up, walked over to the front window, and stared out at the pitch-black yard. My beautiful garden, permanently stained by his crimes. "When does this go down?" 72 hours. The feds are rolling up to the house with a tactical team to extract me for the official debriefing. The second I sign the proffer agreement, the marshals take me underground. "You have 3 days to figure out what you are doing." I turned around and locked eyes with him. "I already know what I am doing. I am divorcing you. I will sign whatever affidavits the FBI needs to corroborate the evidence, but I am not running. I am not changing my name and hiding in the shadows. I am staying right here, and I am rebuilding my life on the truth." I saw a flash of deep pain cross his face, quickly replaced by something that almost looked like respect. "You are tougher than I ever was," he whispered. "Braver, better. I never deserved you, Linda. Not for a single second." "No," I agreed, my voice completely steady. "You didn't." He nodded, swallowing the bitter pill. "I secured a clean bank account for you. Fully vetted by the IRS. Not a single dollar of dirty money. It is all yours. It will keep you comfortable for a very long time. And the deed to the house is fully in your name. I transferred the title years ago just in case the feds ever came knocking. I did that one thing right. I didn't even know how to respond. A massive part of my pride wanted to tell him to shove his money, to reject every last dime, but the practical side of my brain knew I needed a massive safety net to survive this fallout. "Thank you," I finally said, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. "I am so sorry, Linda." His voice completely broke, tears filling his eyes again. "I am sorry for all of it, for every lie, every affair, every time I chose the cartel over my own wife. You deserved a fairy tale." "Yeah," I replied flatly. I did. Over the next 3 days, I moved like a machine, preparing for the blast radius. I signed the divorce papers Susan had rushed over. I sat down at my dining room table and gave a full, sworn deposition to 2 undercover FBI agents who slipped in through the back door. I packed all of Richard's belongings into cardboard boxes and stacked them in the guest room. He wouldn't be taking much into his new ghost life. The morning the extraction team arrived, Richard and I stood face to face in the front hallway for the very last time. There was a mountain of things that could have been screamed, a million insults I could have thrown, but it all just felt like dead air. "Have a good life," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "Find a guy who treats you like the queen you are. Watch your back," I replied. It was the only sliver of grace I had left to give. And just like that, he walked out the door. A black SUV with tinted windows was idling on the curb, surrounded by plainclothes federal agents. The man I had spent 28 years of my life with climbed into the back seat and vanished, almost certainly forever. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the empty street long after the SUV disappeared around the corner. Then, I slowly pushed the heavy oak door shut, flipped the deadbolt, and turned around to look at my house. My house. Mine and mine alone. In the weeks following the extraction, I slowly started to put the pieces back together. I threw out half the furniture, hired painters to cover the walls in bright new colors, and gutted Richard's mahogany office, converting it into a gorgeous, sunlit art studio. And the front yard, my beloved garden that had been poisoned by his duffel bags, I took a shovel to the whole thing. I dug up every single flower bed, ripped out every single root that had grown during the Richard era. I hauled in fresh topsoil. I planted brand new rose bushes, new saplings, and built an entirely fresh landscape. It was backbreaking manual labor for a woman in her 50s, but sweating out the anger was the best therapy money could buy. Betty and I actually became incredibly close friends. We started grabbing coffee at Starbucks every Tuesday, trading life stories, and leaning on each other through the messy reality of starting over so late in the game. I helped her out with her bills whenever I could, not out of pity, but because we genuinely became a lifeline for one another. "You look totally different," she told me over lattes a few months after the dust settled. "You look lighter, like you finally dropped a 100-pound backpack you have been hauling around for decades." "I did," I smiled, taking a sip of my coffee. "I dropped 28 years of toxic lies, and I finally got myself back. Or maybe I am finally meeting the real me for the first time." I looked out the coffee shop window toward my house, imagining my newly planted flowers soaking up the afternoon sun. It was not a graveyard for cartel cash anymore. It was a blank canvas, a place for growth, for fresh starts, for endless possibilities. I am 55 years old. According to society, I should be coasting toward retirement, slowing down, throwing in the towel, and accepting that my glory days are in the rearview mirror. But I figured out the hard way that your life does not just end because you hit a certain birthday or survive a catastrophic nightmare. I went back to college. I finally enrolled in that art history program I had been dreaming about since my 20s. I built a new circle of friends, picked up new hobbies, and unlocked parts of my soul that had been suffocating under Richard's shadow for decades. Do I have bad days? Absolutely. There are nights when the empty house feels suffocating, when the betrayal still stings like a fresh cut, when I torture myself wondering if I could have spotted the red flags in my 30s and saved myself decades of grief. But then I snap back to reality and remember that Richard's crimes were entirely his own. My only job now is to answer to myself, to live out loud, to live honestly, and to take no prisoners. I never heard a single word from Richard again. He is out there somewhere in Middle America, living under a fake name, working some dead-end cover job. I genuinely hope he is living a cleaner, more honest life than the scam he ran on me. But honestly, I rarely waste a second thinking about him. That book is permanently closed. There is an old saying that the truth will set you free. For a huge chunk of my life, I lived in a cushy, air-conditioned lie, totally insulated by my own naivety. When the ugly truth finally kicked the door down, it hurt worse than anything I have ever survived. But that agonizing pain was just the entry fee for my freedom. Now, when I look out at my front yard, all I see is beautiful, untainted life. When I look at my future, the sky is the absolute limit. And when I look in the bathroom mirror every morning, I see a total badass who walked through hell and came out wearing the crown. I am 55 years old, and my real life is just getting started. If you guys enjoyed this story, do not forget to subscribe to the channel, Smash that like button and sound off in the comments below with your thoughts. And if you want to support the channel even more, think about becoming a channel member. You will get access to exclusive content and help us keep producing more crazy stories just like this one. Catch you in the next one.